Hey everybody, it's Bill Whittle and it's the Stratosphere Lounge Lucky episode 13, everybody, and thanks for your patience today. I had a little bit of trouble getting up here. I had a busy day at PJTV covering the RNC, and that got me out a little late, and it wasn't so much the traffic. I had to get to my new apartment and walk through it and do all that other stuff. It's walking distance from my office, and it's going to be fantastic, and as usual, every time I take a little step up in the world, I feel like I have to come out and thank the people that made it possible, which is you, especially my Facebook friends. That's what we try and do this show for. We try to do Stratosphere Lounge to take your questions on the Facebook page, and not an episode goes by where we don't just have, 30 questions that would just be terrific. I just can't get to. And I get the feeling I'm serially forgetting some people or not using some people, and I certainly don't mean to be that case. I just try and find the ones that just strike me as the most interesting, and that's kind of what I go with. So I hope anybody who's been continuing to supply questions doesn't take it too personally. Somebody's moving in around me. I can hear people. There's ghosts in the walls. So we got another great set of questions, and we've got, needless to say, we got a sad thing we have to take care of today with my guy Neil Armstrong, and we'll spend some time with Neil. And then a lot of questions about Ryan and the RNC. We got some off-the-cuff questions, got some personal questions, which I like the most, actually. It's the whole purpose of why I tried to do this show. And then, we'll see where it goes. Just so you know, by the way, I might have mentioned this in the first episode, but I plan to keep this name, this Bill Whittle, and the Stratosphere Lounge as well, because one day, hopefully not too distant future, I'd like to turn this into a TV talk show, and I would like to do it in an underground basement, like a commercial basement. And the whole theory of the Stratosphere Lounge would be, you'd see the opening credits every week would be people driving through Hollywood, and they're looking for things, and they're kind of leaning forward. It'd be kind of a cool crowd, but not a hip crowd, if you can get the difference there. Soldiers and regular people, working people, and that kind of thing. And they're driving through Los Angeles, driving through Hollywood, and they're looking for signs, and there are no signs up. And intercut with this, we'd be getting ready to do the show, and then we'd be in our dressing room, and we'd be, getting our stuff together, and then we would go down this series of stairs to this underground basement, and I would do the whole show underground, and the entire theory would be that the Stratosphere Lounge exists physically underneath a Hollywood studio. It is literally right beneath their feet, and nobody knows where it is. It's the Batcave. Well done, Swad. It's the Batcave, and nobody knows where it's located, and you have to get a special invitation. And when you get down there, instead of it being bleachers and, cheering crowds like on the Daily Show, because you see, you can't do the Daily Show better than the Daily Show. What you can do is you can do something that outflanks the Daily Show. And then what I would do is I would have cocktail tables instead of bleachers, and I'd have the waitresses would be like the hottest creatures on the face of the earth. And in the back, when they're not actually serving drinks, they're working on like physics equations, and they're reading Chaucer. They're just super well educated, and gorgeous and stunning. And we'd invite people down there, and we'd have you'd have to get a little dressed. It'd look a little bit like, going to see Sinatra back in the glory days of Vegas. You had to get a little dressed, and on the back wall there wouldn't be any electronics. In fact, what I really like to do is I'd like to get some of those props. I'd like to get those giant TV cameras from the 60s, the big square things the size of like refrigerators, and the triple lenses with the rotating turret. I'd like to have those props there. We shoot the whole thing in HD, obviously. Then on the far wall, I'd like to have like a real 50s, 60s kind of space swoosh with Stratosphere Lounge, and little rocket going off. And I'd sit there and do a talk show, and we could do a bunch of talk. I'd like to have a band. There's so many conservative friends of mine who are just top-notch musicians. Gary Sinise is one of them. He's gotten to be a good friend of mine. He's a terrific bass player. I'm not saying Gary Sinise doesn't have better things to do with his time. But Zoe, for example, if you know Alfonso Rachel from PJTV, he's a wizard of a drummer. Wizard. And there are a bunch of other guys in the conservative trade who are really good musicians, and I'd like to have a band where you could just talk to the band about deep stuff. And I just think it'd be a blast. And it ties into a question that I forgot to copy, and I had to write it down. So I might as well get to it now because I liked it so much. I actually think it's important. And it was Suzanne Holden wants to know, why do you dress so snazzy? That's the perfect word, by the way, snazzy. That's the perfect word. And do I have a favorite clothing store? And I definitely, I'll just come out and admit it. It's an affectation, the thin ties and the thin lapels. It's not as much of an affectation as a cigar or a fedora or something like that, but it's an affectation for sure. And I like it because, number one, I've always just admired that look. I think that real vertical, clean, thin look is just a good look, period. I grew up in the 70s. They're kind of formative years for me. And I was, I was in high school when, we would have ties that were, you could land fighter jets on those ties. These things were like, they were, James Lilacs. The great thing about the show is I can take all the little circuitous routes I want to. James Lilacs is got a blog called The Institute of Official Cheer. It's at lilacs.com. And if you want to have a great, great, great entire afternoon blown, go to lilacs, LILEKS.com and visit the Institute for Official Cheer. And that's the first blog I ever read, ever. That's what got me interested in into blogs. And Lilacs is a funny, brilliant conservative guy. And Lilacs captures kind of the essence of what America is and should have been and was. And he's so astute. He's got such a great eye for everything. And Lilacs talked about how the 60s went from being so cool in the early half of the 60s with the thin ties and you kind of, in like Flint kind of thing. And you had the whole, Peter Gunn and it was just cool. It was great. And Apollo and Kennedy and all this stuff. And then right around the, 67, the hippies get involved and it all turns into this, it's like a banana that just instantly just goes from being perfectly ripe to being kind of rotten and soft and gooey and gushy, and the whole Haight-Ashbury and the love scene and the, the rolling around in the mud and the bad acid and by the time you got into the 70s, James Lilacs, who's a genius, said it's the wide decade. It's the wide decade. Wide ties, wide lapels, wide hair, wide everything, wide, and nothing. It's just horrible. And then you had, I wish I had the picture with me. It's on my Facebook page. You had this little outbreak in the 80s where the thin ties came back. And just so you know, I think there's a picture somewhere on my Facebook page. I'm pretty sure it's in my professional page, which most of you guys get to see. It's also my personal page, which I hardly ever check. So if you sent me a friend request and it got turned down because the box is full, I just don't ever use it, and I don't want people befriending me there because I never, ever look at it. But anyway, there's a picture of me from 1985, I guess, 86, and I've got my hair is like down to here, and I got this awesome black jacket. The shoulder pads probably came out to like, here. Just gigantic things and real narrow lapels. And I had a white satin shirt and had a white satin tie, a real thin tie, and it was Japanese characters with a red rising sun on it kind of thing, and had a pair of black pants with a zipper that went down the outside of the leg all the way down to the heel. So the 80s were kind of like trying to get back to this look. But really, the look is intentional, and that thin tie, thin lapel look, I choose because, number one, I just like it. And I'd wear it if I didn't have any other reason to like it. Number two, I think, it was a whittle mullet. Dave Olson, you got a problem with that? It was a whittle mullet. It wasn't actually a mullet because it wasn't close at the sides. See, that's the thing. My sister accused me of being a mullet. I showed her the picture. She wanted to submit it to mullets.com. It's just hilarious, my sister. But it wasn't a mullet. And the reason it wasn't a mullet because it wasn't close at the sides. It was long at the sides, which is awesome. I'm sensitive about the mullet thing. Sorry about that, Dave. I didn't mean to be such a jerk. But anyway, I would like it. I just like the look. But when you get into things like Mad Men and all of the attempts to recreate Mad Men, and you had Pan Am, and now there's a Miami Beach thing, everybody wants to go back to the early 60s, and I just like the look. And here's why I like the look. All of that to say this, the Stratosphere Lounge, the theme song, everything. I like it because I think it's America at the height of its powers. It's the Apollo program. It's Kennedy. It's, we're out of World War II, and we've won World War II, and we're out of a lot of the repression of the 50s, and it's just starting to flow, man. 61, 62, 63, it's starting to flow. And I don't want to wear a costume because I think if I wear a costume like an actual period piece, you're kind of saying that's the past, and I'm not interested in becoming nostalgia guy and talking about back when America was a great country. I can't stand that kind of talk. I won't abide it personally. But what I am talking about is reclaiming with the idea of the Stratosphere Lounge, the theory behind the TV show would be we are going to not try to be hipper than the left, because the left defines us as unhip. Whatever we are, the opposite of that is what they describe as hip. But what I want to do is I want to just completely ignore that and just go for a look that says successful, elegant, classy, and educated. And just put it out there and not try to be something or not try to get down with the fat beats, and have my hat on sideways in my hoodie and all that other stuff. Just go back to the days when America was at the height of its powers and say we are capturing this vibe, not because of nostalgia, but to remind us of the kind of people that we were and are and will be again, because we're not going to let it go. Optimism. That's right, Rich. America on optimism overdrive. And he tweeted it too. Isn't that awesome? Yes, that's exactly right. Optimism overdrive. That's a fantastic expression. That's absolutely fantastic. And that's where I want to go with it. So that's why I dress this way. And by the way, I did a piece on iconography, back in 2009 after Obama walked in. And one of the things I said at the beginning, iconography was about lighting and imagery and graphics and all the stuff that the left and the Democrats were just doing so good. Don't turn into a hipster. Darkstream, I'm talking about the opposite of a hipster. The thin tie and the suit and the tie pin. Hipsters are guys that take like one element of that, like Schlitz beer or the old glasses, and then they just mix it up in this whole kind of rave acid, ecstasy kind. No. We're not talking. We're a long way from hipsters. We're anti-hipsters. Hipsters suck. So what? And somebody, I'm really into the comment stream today. Second American century, yes, you bet a second American century, just like Chris Christie said. And the only change I would have made to that would have been the second of an infinite series of American centuries. I don't ever want it to not be an American century. And I can't do anything about the third American century, but I can help with the second. So yeah, that's exactly it. Let's just re-own the look of optimism and success and elegance and education and class. That's why in the Stratosphere Lounge people have to get dressed. And that's why in the Stratosphere Lounge even the super smoking hot waitresses are reading Chaucer and they're practicing their nuclear physics, because we can do these things. We can. So that's why I have the look. And as far as a favorite clothing store, it's really, really hard to get these looks. If I had the money, and I will someday, I would go out and I'd buy some actual shark skin, and I'd get like an electric blue shark skin suit, custom made. But right now, I have to buy off the rack. And the best place for me to do that right now is a store. It's a really trendy store. It's like kind of overly trendy, and I'm not happy about it. But somebody said the only place you can really go to get that thin lapel look, and it's an Italian store called Zara. And a couple of my suits are from Zara. I just bought a new suit, and I'm going to have it tailored to fit. It's got a little more sheen on it. Looks a little more shark skinny, which I like a lot. And so Zara, but the problem with Zara is that the pants are cut for Italian models who are, 19 years old, and they got this kind of low-cut look, which I don't like. I'm kind of like, I've always liked my dad. I like my pants up around my, third rib, something like that. So, I have to kind of get them retailored a little bit. But I think the look is cool, and I like it, and I often will look at the three squares on Trifecta, and me and Steve Green and Scott Ott, and I pity those poor fools. I pity them. Yeah, I love those guys. We did an RNC section today where we had Andrew Clavin call in, and my relationship with Andrew Clavin on this show is so good. I don't know if any of you are PJTV members, but we do a show there called Clavin Whittle, which of course really should have been named Whittle Clavin. The rating would be a lot better, obviously, if that had been the case. We take questions on that show, and we talk about stuff, and it's the best 7 or 8 minutes of commentary out there. I just think the relationship between Andrew and I and the things we say are fantastic. I think it's worth the membership just for that show. I wish they'd promote it, but they don't. But anyway, it's cool. And Monster there with the Chase Lounge from Ejectia comment on the Ustream thing, which will mean nothing to anybody but Monster. God bless you. Those were some of the most fun days in the world. You know what? I'm going to spend another 2 minutes talking about Ejectia just because my friend Monster there brought me back to some happy days. If you go to billwhittle.net, I've reactivated eject.com. and it's a tab. You can just push the button and go back to the blog that got me started. And there was a period there, and I want to say that period was July of 2007, seems about right, June, July of 2007. We had a small community of people that I recruited from Eject, and what we were trying to do was we were trying to make an online community called Ejectia, and there was going to be, we did some computer graphics for it, which were pretty cool. And it was just basically, the idea was, as a giant city up in the mountains in the stratosphere. This whole stratosphere thing is so interesting to me. And it was basically a city not in the clouds, but on the top of a mountain that was in the clouds, not like Bespin from Star Wars. But it was built on the ground, but tall skyscrapers built on the top of mountains. So this whole city was up in the sky. And the idea would be that each one of these buildings would represent something. So there'd be the Ejectia library, and if you hit the library, you would go to the library, and in the library you would find, what I was hoping to do with it was I was hoping to find a bunch of user-submitted content that would teach you things that you just might want to know. Here's how you construct a fly fishing lure, or here's the best way to store champagne, or here's how you resole a broken shoe. Just whatever. I didn't care. I just liked the idea of smart people putting their expertise out there for free. And there would be an observatory with an update on what's going on in the night sky tonight, and there would be, all these different forums and rooms and places for debates, and you have kind of debate, competitions like brackets. And it was just fun. I miss that. And Andrew Zappa has a comment there that says, Bill, Kim Dutoit, Misha from the Anti-Idiotarian Rottweiler, and Rachel Lucas are the best old guard or old gangster bloggers. It's true. I have to close this, and we'll get to the questions because I know I'm on a bit of an odd sort of a opening tonight. But the one thing I will say, those names mean a lot to me, and I'll say this. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I would not be here without any of them, but especially Rachel Lucas. Rachel Lucas got me stick time on her blog. It just basically promoted the daylights out of me. But what she really did was, when she said, Bill, you need to get a blog, I said, I don't know how to set that up. Rachel Lucas basically put the blog up. She put it up. She did all the coding. I did the graphics and the elements, and I supplied it to her, and she just did it for me. Otherwise, I never would have gotten started. I didn't know how, and she just did it. She just built the blog and put it up for me. And she's still out there blogging at rachellucas.com, and if you've already known who she is, you tell her I said hi, and if you haven't, you should go see her. She's a little more intermittent now. She moved to Europe. She's a Texas kid. But Rachel Lucas, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, and I just wouldn't be here without her. Anyway, enough of the preamble and stuff. Let's get started with the real stuff. And I knew this day was coming, and I just wish it had come a little bit later, because I get the feeling if I'd had another 6 months, I would have been able to meet the guy. But let's talk a little bit about the greatest man who ever lived during my life. My favorite, anyway. Whether he's greater than Ronald Reagan or Winston Churchill, both of whom were alive when I was alive, I don't know. But he's in the top 3, and he may be in the top 1. When Neil Armstrong, when I got familiar with the Apollo program, I was probably about 5 when I first got turned on to the whole aerospace thing. I saw the Thunderbirds. I've told the story 100 times. I won't tell it again. But I saw the Thunderbirds when I was 5, and I immediately just fell in love with aviation and space, and it never, ever changed. It never got that bug out of my system. So during the mid to early 60s, mid to late 60s, when I was a kid, I was born in 59, so in 66 I was, 7. I watched all of these programs, built all the models. I knew exactly what was going on. I just lived and breathed this stuff. And as we got into the Apollo program, and I got to be like 8 or 9, I would build the Revell, 2-foot-tall model of the Saturn V, which was a tough build, by the way, because the way they did the fuel tanks was not hard plastic. It was tough model to build. But I got to know the hardware and the people so well that I would go to my school and I would basically, for show and tell, I'd just say, here's the Saturn V with the 5, the J1 engines. I don't remember anymore. I'm pretty sure they were J5 engines, I guess. And here's the first stage, and here's the second stage fairing. Here's the second stage that gets it into orbit. Here's the third stage, which kicks the thing towards the moon, and then the command module comes off. The escape tower goes off during launch. Command module comes off, comes back, redocks, pulls the LEM out of the third stage. LEM leg deploys. Command service module then gets into lunar orbit. Down goes the LEM. The LEM lands on the surface. The top stage of the lunar module comes up, docks back up with the command service module assembly. The command module boosts it back into Earth orbit. You ditch the LEM, you ditch the service module. The command module enters in this one little 2% top of the Saturn V stack is what actually comes back with the people and the rocks in it. So I was into this whole thing, and needless to say, I was into the whole thing. I saw Apollo 11 launch from my cousin's house. We lived in Bermuda at the time, but we came to visit the States once a year, and we were in the country for that. And I watched them launch from one of those great old color TVs. You remember those old first-generation RCA color TVs when color was still, it kind of bled a lot. There was a lot of color bleeding, and all of this is the magic of the first years of color back around 66, 67. The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC, and the peacock would spread its little feathers on the end. But the great thing about original color programming was they figured you just spent real money on a color television, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, and we are going to make sure here at the National Broadcasting Company that you get your color dollars worth out of our programming. So if you look at the mid to late 60s shows, I Dream of Jeannie and Star Trek are great examples. They just burst out with color. And Wild Wild West, what a great show. They're just reds and purples and greens and just everything was just vibrant and alive. It was fantastic. And we used to turn the color up to 11 anyway, because you could mess around with those things back then. Anyway, I watched Apollo 11 go off the pad in Pennsylvania at my cousin's house, and then I was in New York City. My dad's a hotel manager, and he was good friends with the manager of the Plaza, so I was in the Plaza Hotel on Times Square, New York City, on January 20th, 1969, late at night on Eastern Time, and I went to the window. We opened the window down in Central Park. They'd erected these giant projection screens, and there were tens of thousands of people down there. And I remember looking out the window and seeing all these people. And then I remember we turned on the TV, and you saw the foot of the LEM, and there was this kind of blob. And I honestly do not, I clearly remember saying, I can't make sense out of what I'm seeing. And my dad had to get up and kind of walk forward to the room and point out, here's the leg of the LEM, here's the footpad, and that's the guy's. Oh, okay, I got it. And then he stepped out, and it was silent as a tomb until he basically said, that's one small step for a man, which is what he meant to say, which is the correct, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind is grammatically incorrect. He meant to say one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And that's actually what he said, believe it or not. They took a real close look at the audio on it, and they ran it through some filters, and he actually swallowed the but he said it. It's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. You know what I love about this country? I think you can really encapsulate what I love about this country in this one thing. The first words to broadcast, well, the first word to come from another planet, by the way. Anybody know what the first word to be broadcast from another planet is? First word to come from another planet is Houston. Should be a thrill for you Texans out there and you Houston residents, particularly Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. But the first words that Neil said when he stepped off of that rocket, off of the footpad on the LEM, the reason I love America is I cannot for the life of me imagine any other country in the world leaving something that historic up to a pilot. A pilot. This guy is a test pilot, not known for his poetry. There's a lot to admire about Neil Armstrong, but effusiveness of communication is not one of those things. One of the things I admire about him. He's so taciturn and terse and very, very, very under control. And not only NASA, the president, the American people, you would think these are going to be the most important words ever spoken, and they were. And a guy from Ohio just said, well, you got anything planned, Neil? I got a few things. I got something I think I might say. All right, we trust you. We trust you. That's amazing, isn't it? That's just amazing and remarkable and magnificent for a country to have that kind of faith in the common people, because ultimately you can make the case that the greatest explorer, I think the greatest American that lived during my lifetime, maybe one of the 2 or 3 greatest Americans ever, Neil Armstrong, I think he was just ultimately a regular guy. He was a regular guy, had some unusual skills, but what he really mostly had was dedication and courage. And there's a lot of that out there for America. To trust him with something that historic, who does that? Can you imagine the French saying, well, whatever the first words you be? No, the committee, there's some école, some institute would have had 15 draft versions of this and run it through this and that, and they would, come on. Nobody would have let the guy who flew the bloody rocket say the thing that they wanted him to say, and it was perfect. It was perfect. It couldn't have been improved on. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. It's an astonishing thing. And if you look at my Facebook page, if you go to my actual page, I know a lot of the updates show up on your walls. I have a picture of Neil looking down, and it's not him from Apollo. It's him it's in a Gemini suit. I think he's suiting up for a Gemini 6. And I got a picture of me in a spacesuit. And the sightlines worked out well, so I did a little fun thing there with that. But he looks almost angelic. He's just such a handsome guy, and he's such an all-American looking guy. He's not strikingly handsome, not like a model, but he's just got this all-American look. And if you look at the picture on the Facebook page, and I'm only using that to identify it, it's a picture of him in a Gemini suit. He just looks very focused and calm. I'm looking at the picture. Focused and calm, and, if you'll pardon the expression, tranquil. He's tranquil. He's a man at the top of his game, doing the one thing he loves more than anything in the world, and doing it as well as it can be done. I don't know what you say about that. I only heard this expression late in life, but it went through me like an electric bolt. I mean, just shot a lightning through my temple. But apparently, the Greek definition of happiness is using all of your abilities to maximum effect. That's a profound thing. Using all of your skills and talents to maximum effect. That's the definition of happiness according to the Greeks. I couldn't agree with that more. Honest to God, I've never been happier than I am when I do my job as well as it can be done. That just fills me with a kind of satisfaction that is impossible to describe. To people who've never had the experience, I'd be willing to bet you everybody who's listening to this has had that experience. So, he was a man at the height of his powers, civilization at the height of its powers, doing something that was impossible. There's something also I want to mention about the moon landing that I don't think many people realize. And one of the Apollo astronauts, and I'm so sorry I don't remember who it was. It might have been Cernan, but I'm not sure. Basically said that the moon landing was an act of will where the engineers and the scientists and the astronauts reached forward into the future, 50 years into the future, and pulled that moon landing out of the future. In other words, we really didn't have the capability to go to the moon in 1965, 70, 69, We really landed in 69, but we just faked it. We just didn't really have the means, but we did it. We did it with slide rules and with computers, as commonly said, and forget a smartphone. A smartphone was thousands of times more powerful than what we're seeing today. I think the fact that they went to the moon on slide rules is astonishing. Looks like we might have some people are having some problems with the feed here. You know what? I hate it when this happens, especially for you YouTube people, which are most of the people, but give me 1 second so I can turn on the audio and make sure I've got some audio here. If we got audio, then... Hang on. I hope... Hello, welcome to the Stratosphere Cave. Sound is good. Hope it's a localized problem, and with the technical issues here, we're going crazy. By the way, you'll be pleased to know that we are talking about getting a better internet connection, although we're cooking with gas tonight. Anyway, where were we? We were talking about Neil and the moon landing and how we had to reach into the future to make that happen. Everybody in NASA was happy. They were the definition of happy. They were the best people in the business, working past the limits of anything they'd ever done before to do something awesome and important. It's as good as it gets. I'm going to reverse the order of what I was going to do tonight. I was going to save the how I'm going to walk on the moon stuff for last, but I'm going to get to it right now. Before I move on, though, so Joseph Kunstler asked for the Neil Armstrong tribute, and David Ellis also wanted to know what was my take on Obama interjecting himself once again into the conversation with his tribute picture to Neil Armstrong. And if I'd had more time to prepare tonight, I would have shown it to you for those of you who haven't seen it. Barack Obama made an official mention of Neil Armstrong's passing by showing a picture of himself silhouetted against the night sky looking up at the moon, and I think it must be Jupiter or Venus, with it's the back of his head, so you can tell it's him from the jug ears, and he's looking up in wonder, and it's like, gee, isn't that swell? It's all about Barack Obama. He didn't have his dog Bo next to him, B-O, not B-E-A-U, Bo, B-O. Barack Obama names his own dog after himself. You want to salute the greatest man who ever lived on this planet, certainly in the last 50, 60 years. You can't possibly show a picture of him or anything. It has to be a picture of the genuinely greatest man who ever lived, which of course is Barack Obama. These guys they're going down so hard, you have no idea. All right, here's and Frank Brown wants to know that I also doesn't want me to mention that he flew the X-15. The X-15, he according to Frank, and I'm sure this is correct, he went to 207,000 feet and Mach 5.3. It's 5.5 times the speed of sound. People don't really know much about the X-15 program. You can make a very, very, very compelling case that the first men in actual outer space were the X-15 pilots. I don't know if they ever, I'm quite sure they did on one of the flights achieve the definitional altitude, which I think is 317,000 feet. I think Spaceship One's tail number is November something 317 kf or something for kilofeet. That's the number that you need to get to be in the definition. That's 75 kilometers or something, whatever the number is. Whether or not the X-15 pilots made it officially into space, they were very, very close to being in space. And if you get into the right stuff of the book anyway, you find that we really had an opportunity to do space in a different way back in the early days of NASA when you had the Air Force test pilots. And these were pilots. This is what the right stuff's all about. The movie carries this too. Basically, the idea that the test pilots, really resented the idea of a capsule. They wanted to fly into space. These were stick and rudder guys. And the X-15 was the precursor of a vehicle that was never actually flown, I don't think. It was certainly well into the design phase. It was called the Dynasaur, D-Y-N-A-S-O-A-R. It's a really cool name. And it was an Air Force program designed to basically fly into space with a winged vehicle, much like a very, very small shuttle, much more efficient vehicle than the shuttle. And Dynasaur would have been a reusable program all the way. Now, you can't take a reusable spacecraft like the Dynasaur and get what kind of hardware you need into space in order to get to the moon. But nevertheless, we got to the moon. I'm gonna tell you how I plan to walk on the moon, and I planned to do this before Neil died, which is why I was so upset when he died, for many reasons, not the least of which was that I needed his help, and I was planning to talk to him within the next 6 months. And I'm going to keep this brief because I don't want this to really get out. I know putting it on the internet means it's getting out, but this is not a public announcement, and when you hear the public announcement, it'll be a polished public announcement. So this is just a sketch for our friends. Declaration Entertainment is really Jeremy Boring's ball. It was his idea, and I helped work on it for a couple years, and Declaration pays me and produces the firewalls, and so I'm obviously a big part of Declaration Entertainment, but it's really Jeremy's bag. And his film's about ready to be done. He's just working on final color correction. I'm going to be doing a movie called Aurora, which is about the real exploration of the solar system, and we've talked about Aurora. We're not going to get into Aurora right now. There is a Neil Armstrong tribute that was in Aurora, but it was in Aurora from the first draft in 2005. But this movie is going to be about exploring the solar system, and I plan to use the revenues from that movie, whatever they may be, and they're not going to be. They might be significant, but if they're not, it doesn't matter. But what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to show the American people that these things can happen now, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch something called the Free Frontier, which is the name of a private space video I did, and if you haven't seen it, I occasionally post it. It's called the Free Frontier. It's on Bill Whittle channel on YouTube, and it deals with private space as it existed a year ago. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the freefrontier.com, and it's going to be a 501c3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the American people, and I'm going to say, for $9.95 a month, you can put Americans on the moon, and they'll never come back. you can have Americans exploring the solar system. It's going to cost you $9.95 a month. And the way I'm going to sell it is, I'm going to basically say, if you think that having Americans in space is not just a matter of national prestige, but a matter of essential national character, then it is not going to happen with the government. And I know you're already paying more taxes than you should pay, and I'm asking you for another tax. I'm asking you for another $120 a year in tax, $9.95 a month recharged on your credit card. But let me tell you what we're going to do with that money. If you had 1 million people who signed up for this, that's 1/3 of 1% of the population of the United States. If you had 1 million people, that'd be $10 million a month, so $120 million a year. That's rapidly approaching the rate at which you could build the hardware. If you had 3 or 4 million people, you could not build the hardware fast enough to keep up with the money. So 5, 6 million people is my goal. 10 million people would be the absolute unbelievable extreme. 10 million people is, what is that? 2-3% of the American population having this put on their card. Now, what do you get for your $9.95 a month? Well, you get space exploration, obviously, and you get progress, because the one thing that we would be committed to, as opposed to the government, which has become nothing but risk-averse, what you would be buying is you would be buying progress. That's what we sell. We sell progress. And you would get daily updates about what is being done with your money, but you would also get something else. Because the one breakthrough idea I had about this would be, we would use those funds to buy hardware as it became safe. And so while I am not talking about space tourism, I am not talking about space tourism at all. I am talking about putting the American flag throughout the solar system. And I am talking about spending money directly on private companies so they can do the things that need to get done. And we would coordinate these things. We would be the coordinating agency. So rather than giving money to SpaceX and hoping that SpaceX was going to do stuff with the money, we would say, no, we have a step-by-step plan. And I'll tell you what that plan is in a minute. But I would say to Elon Musk, Elon, we need to buy 4 Falcon 5 launches and we need 2 Falcon 5 Heavies. What's that going to cost us? $185 million. Here's the check. Do you want a check? Do you want a cashier's check? Do you want cash? What do you want? We buy them. We buy inflatable hardware from Bigelow Aerospace. We take orbital maneuvering systems from X-Corps, and we take all the other things we need from these private space companies. We get the structures done by Scaled Composites, and you basically do these things, and you have a plan, and I'll tell you about that plan in a minute. But the part of it that I think is so interesting is you get constant daily updates, but you also get this. First money I would spend is on something called a Viper jet. It's a $800,000 million, somewhere in that ballpark. It's a private 2-seat jet. It's like a little fighter. It's an American-made all-composite jet. And for the first $800,000, which with a million members is probably 4 days of revenue, somewhere in that ballpark, 6, 7, 8 days of revenue, I would buy that jet. I'd paint the logo on the bottom, across the bottom of the wings. I'd paint the logo on the tail, and then I'd fly around the country promoting the free frontier. And here's the model that I would use in order to keep people signing up and making them sign up. I would use something similar to the mindset that goes into the lottery. And basically what I'm saying is this. You become a member of the Free Frontier for $9.95 a month, and your name goes into a big old bin, and once a week or once a month, certainly once a month, no less than that, we raffle off a ride in the best hardware we have. And maybe we could do it twice a month. Maybe we could do it once a week. I'll get to the details in a minute. So for the beginning, in a 2-seat jet, I'll go around the country, and if all we have is the jet, in the first couple months, you get a ride in a high-performance jet with me, and we'll go around, fly around through the sky, burn a hole through the sky, and we will offer that as a raffle member for your $9.95 a month. Very quickly, that would go to a ride in the Lynx, which is a 2-person suborbital vehicle built by my friends up at X-Corps, and I've gotten to be good friends with Burt Rutan. I bounced this idea off him personally, along with some other people. And Burt said that when they made the deal with Virgin Galactic for Spaceship Two, which is a 7-person passenger vehicle, he said they can buy as many as they want to, but the deal was that they wouldn't be exclusive. In other words, Scaled Composites can make Spaceship Two for anybody. Now, so let's say it's $30, $40 million. That's a hunk of money, but that's 2-3 months' income. I would buy Spaceship Two. I would buy a White Knight 2, and I would buy a 7-passenger suborbital vehicle. I'd spend most of the money that comes in on R&D. That's what our long-term goal is. But I would buy Spaceship Two. I'd buy one of the vehicles that Virgin is going to buy. And I'd run it out of Las Vegas, I think, or Los Angeles, somewhere like that. And here's what we would do. 7 passengers, so since we own the vehicle, and we're really just talking about putting kerosene into it and liquid oxygen, I try to fly 7 people a week. I'd certainly fly 7 members a month. So for $9.95 a month, you can go into space. You can go on a suborbital ride into space. That ride costs $200,000 with Virgin Atlantic. For us, it would cost you $9.95 a month. After we got that set up, we'd start to continue with our orbital progress. I'd go to Bigelow Aerospace, who wants to put a hotel into space, and I'd ask him about his plans, and if those plans matched our plans, we'd fund him. If they didn't match our plans, we'd buy the hardware. So once we had a reliable means of getting into space, and when I say reliable, I mean reasonably safe, I'd have the world's greatest attorneys, sad to say, write us the world's greatest disclaimer and release of liability. And then, for our members, for our membership pool, we would just draw people and you'd get to go into orbit for $9.95 a month. For your $9.95 a month, you have a chance to go into orbit. We put inflatable habitats up in orbit. You get to stay 3 days in orbit for $9.95 a month. This is where some of the conversation I had with Burt Rutan comes in. Burt is convinced that orbital tourism, that kind of thing, would be great. You got to understand the model here. We're not selling space tourism. What we're doing is we're selling a very large pool of people paying $10 a month. If we had $2, $3, $4 million, you cannot build this hardware that I'm talking about fast enough. They can't create it fast enough. Do this in 3 years. So once we had an orbital presence, I would get a vehicle. And here's the end goal. All right. Here's the end goal. What I want is I want a vehicle that's constructed in Earth orbit, and I want a vehicle that's got some significant delta V. I want something with a little push. I want something that can go someplace. I want a wagon. One of the things I discuss in Aurora, the entire financial plot of Aurora, at least in the story, is these guys are creating relatively low cost. They're still $100 million vehicles, but that's relatively low cost. It is a vehicle that can go anywhere in the solar system. So really what you need are some fuel tanks. Ultimately, I'd like to have an atomic rocket. We'd start with chemical rockets. We're going to constantly update and build these things because we're selling progress here. We're selling progress. We're selling about things getting better than they were last month, like it used to be in the 60s when we all wore thin ties. And so I would start off with a significant amount of thrust in orbit, and I'd have an orbital vehicle. I'd have a vehicle that could leave the Earth orbit. We take it on shakedown runs, and shakedown runs would be into lunar orbit. We'd go to the moon routinely. We'd go once a week or twice a month, routinely, just to get these new vehicles out here. Now, Burt Rutan thinks, I never conceived of this is why the guy's a genius. He thinks the greatest ride in the universe, at least that we can foresee, you have to bear with me on this. It's genius. He thinks that the greatest ride in the universe would be something that is actually relatively simple to do. Landing on the moon is a fairly complex thing to do because you have to get the hardware down and then you have to get the hardware and the people back up into lunar orbit. But getting from the Earth to the moon, once you're in Earth orbit, you're 96, 97% of the way to anywhere in the solar system. It's 95% of the total energy to go anywhere in the solar system is just to get it into Earth orbit. Once you're in Earth orbit, you're in good shape. So we have a little orbital hotel up there, little inflatable habitats from Bigelow, and then we'd have a vehicle that was never designed to land on a planet. And this vehicle would do the Burt Rutan special. And the Burt Rutan special is this. It would go from Earth to moon, probably in about 2 days, just like the Apollo program, maybe a little bit faster. We have a little more kick than they did. And then, my friends, what we would do is we have such astonishing precision in terms of our navigation abilities. And we also have such a precise map of lunar topography. We understand the gravity anomalies. We understand this very, very well. Burt Rutan said you could put people on a vehicle and you could get the perigee, or I suppose I should say the paraloon or the periapsis is probably more correct, but the closest approach to the moon. Now listen carefully. You could make that very low. And I said, what, how low? 20 miles? He said, 20 miles. You could bring a vehicle down to 500-600 feet above the surface. You could certainly do it to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet with utter safety. Now think about this. When you're in orbit around the Earth, you're moving at 17,500 miles an hour, somewhere in that ballpark. But you're moving 17,500 miles an hour at 125 miles above the surface. So even though you see the Earth doing its nice kind of, you get the continents slowly, but it's not exactly a speed rush. If you had an elliptical orbit around the moon, and the closest approach of that vehicle were to be, since there's no atmosphere on the moon, you could probably be traveling over the lunar surface 500, 600, 700 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet above the surface of the moon, and you'd be doing 10,000 miles an hour. That would be a bit of a rush. You would just see the lunar horizon come up, 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 and then the whole thing just turned into a blur. And you know what I would do with that first orbit, ladies and gentlemen? My first orbit on that first trip to the moon on the Rutan special? I would run the orbital mechanics so that closest approach occurred directly over the Apollo 11 lunar module on the Sea of Tranquility, so all those D-bags out there who still think there's a problem doing this will be able to look down and watch this thing go by right underneath their window, and gone. Yep, that's it. There it is. And then, when we had this technology perfected, I would offer people who were members of the Free Frontier a chance to go around the moon and fly 500 feet above the surface at 10,000 miles an hour. And you know what it would cost to do that? You know what your ticket will cost you? $9.95 a month. $9.95 a month is what it would cost you. The end goal is this. When I say the end goal, I mean the beginning of the end of where I can foresee the design process going. The end goal would be a vehicle much like that would have the Delta V, hopefully using atomic rockets, using nuclear thermal rockets. The NERVA program back in 1967 and 1970 created, I think it was 22 of these things. They worked perfectly. They have double the ISP, the specific impulse of chemical engines, which means they've got twice the bang per buck. For every pound of propellant you have to carry up into space to get this thing going, you get twice the thrust out of a bad nuclear thermal rocket than you do out of a chemical rocket. Just much more energetic reaction. It expands more energetically, gives you more thrust. So I'd like atomic rockets, but you could do this with chemicals if you had to. And what I would do, and this actually kind of took the wind out of Bert when I told him about it back on the 4th of July. I said I would take one of those vehicles from Earth orbit. You know where I would go? I would go to Venus. Venus? What do you mean Venus? They couldn't believe I would go to Venus. No one talks about Venus. They said, why would you go to Venus? And I said, because at closest approach, Venus is not much more than 20 times further than the moon. Venus is much closer than Mars, much closer. Venus is easy to reach because you're actually going into the gravity well. And if you took a spacecraft to Venus that had Free Frontier on the side and went from Earth, even if you flew past Venus, even if you didn't have the energy or want to spend the energy to decelerate into Venus orbit, even if you did a Venus flyby, you would be able to say, we have just gone to another planet, and we did it with the American taxpayer paying $9.95 a month on his credit card because he or she wanted this country to be great again. We just flew to another planet. We did it ourselves on our own dime. And we paid all these companies, private companies, money to do it, and they paid their staff, and that's why we did it. And we are going. And that's what we're going to do. So that's the plan. Now, I said to myself, what do I get out of this? Well, what I would get out of this personally, I'm going on all these flights for sure. Bert said, no, you can't go. Bert's a sweet man. He said, you can't go, you're too valuable. I said, well, if you think I'm going to just sit behind a desk and watch this happen, you got another thing coming. I'm going. But when I thought about a trip to Venus, which would probably take 4 weeks or so, somewhere in that vicinity, I basically said to myself, would I be willing to do that? Yes, of course I'd be willing to do it. Yeah, even if it was a 50-50 chance, I'd be willing to go. But we all like to have better odds than that. And that's when I had a small wrinkle to the design, because I've shown you the design for Aurora, which is cinematic. It's practical and it works, and we talk about how the ship works, but it's cinematic. What I would do for the mission to Venus, for the generation 1 of these wagons, and I get to the wagon thing in a second. The first generation, what I would do is I basically have a stack of vehicles, and this is for the science nerds out here, but I'd have the rocket engines at the bottom, and then I'd have the crew compartments, and then I'd have assuming it's a chemical thing, then I'd have the fuel tankage, and up at the top I'd have a little docking module. And I'd make 2 of these things, and I'd make them identical, so you get the economy of scale, and you get everything right, and I'd call one of them Constitution, and I'd name the other one Enterprise. And I would launch both of these things at the same time. They're absolutely identical. And then when they're finished with their burn, they would dock nose to nose, and then they would start to spin. And for most of the flight, which is, of the four weeks travel time, you're probably talking about an hour or 2 when you're actually under thrust. Probably less than that. Probably much less than that. So they would just dock, and you'd spin them, and you'd get half a G, which would help. And then that way, one vehicle could explode, and as long as this vehicle didn't take out the crew compartment, if their engine didn't restart, or if a fuel tank blew up, or if you had some sort of wiring problem, each ship would have just barely enough excess capability if everybody's sleeping on the floor and we're eating, crackers, that kind of thing, and breathing real slow, but there'd be the life support capability on each one of the two ships to bring both crews home. So you'd have a lifeboat with you at all times. You'd always have a lifeboat. Because we're thinking about safety. We're not idiots. But we also know that, in the words of my friend Mike Rowe, if you've ever seen Dirty Jobs, then you know who Mike Rowe is. And Mike Rowe got in a lot of trouble because he did a series called Safety Third. And I think I might have talked about this once. Yeah, Safety Third. That's our motto at the Free Frontier. Safety Third. Safety Third. No, Safety First. No, not Safety First. This is what's killed NASA. This is why NASA's have become a joke. It's ineffective. It's why the shuttle is such a mess. It's why they put all these incredible restraints, why NASA puts these unreasonable restraints on guys like Elon Musk. Because the fact of the matter is there's endless number of people out there, and I'm one of them, who would ride on the Falcon rocket and the Dragon capsule tomorrow sight unseen without any question whatsoever. I'd go. I would go in a heartbeat. I would go. Knowing full well that this thing may be 80% safe, 90% safe. I think it's better than that. I don't care. I don't care if it's 50% safe. I'm going to go. Because we are not as precious as we make ourselves out to be. You know, Precious Snowflake Bill is a nice guy to have around, and I'm not in any hurry to get out of here. Believe me, I'd like to stick around for a long time. I got a lot of work to do. But if I were to lose my life in an explosion of a Falcon 9 rocket, there are other guys ready to take the next flight, and the flight after that, and the flight after that. We learned how to do commercial aviation to the degree where we've had 10 years, almost 11 years now, without a single crash of a large jetliner over American soil, not one single major accident that involved a fatality using a large, a commercial-sized jet on a major carrier. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. And no, you can't have my car, damn you, David Wellman. That car is going to go to a museum where it belongs. It's astonishing, the safety record. Why is commercial aviation safety record so good? It's so good because we learned how to do commercial aviation by the fact that we killed thousands of people. We lost, if you read a book called Fate is the Hunter, it's a fantastic book. It's about the early days of commercial aviation. They were losing air crews and best friends a week. Where's Dave and John? Now they went in. Where'd they go in? Now they flew into some ice over, Akron, and now they're gone. Yeah, okay, well. They were losing guys every week. That's how you had to learn how to do these things. That's how you learn. Monster said it. You go big or you go home. If you're not going to play ball, don't play ball. That means if you're going to do something dangerous and learn how to do it the right way, you are going to take losses, and people are going to die doing this. And if you don't understand that going in, you're probably not the right guy to be doing this. Now, the reason I say we wait till the technology is somewhat mature before we bring Free Frontier members on board is because we don't want to kill our members. We want the test pilots are the guys who understand the risks fully and who choose to develop the systems and the hardware. But once it's safe enough, so we feel that it's a reasonable risk, if you want to take that risk and you want to sign a legal document that is ironclad saying you understand the risk and you're ready to go, then you are going into outer space or to the moon or, by God, to Venus for $9.95 a month. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Ernie K. Gann, yeah, amazing story, great writer. I'm not kidding about this. I'm as serious as I can be. So that's the basic plan. Now, the reason I want to do this is because I want the end goal of this to be a large number of interplanetary vehicles, and I call them Conestoga wagons. And the argument that I make in Aurora, dramatically, and that I would make to the American people, would be this. If you want a mission to Mars, see, this is the entire purpose, and you got to really understand this very clearly. I'm not talking about a mission to Mars. I'm not talking about a moon base. I'm not talking about any of this stuff. I am talking about creating the hardware so that people who want to do these things don't have to find $500 million or $500 billion. If you had the vehicles that could go anywhere, you have a company, you want to land on the moon, fantastic. Get somebody to build your lander. We can recommend some people if you'd like. Buy the lander. We'll get your lander there and we'll get the people back. Fantastic. You want to go to Mars? Great. You're going to need 3 of these things. And guess what? You don't even need to buy them. You could rent them from us if you like. When the West was settled, look, what we're doing now is we're exploring. And if you want to explore, you need a certain kind of a vehicle. You need an exploration vehicle. Best way to think of that is this. When they were exploring the West, Lewis and Clark, when they were exploring the West, they went out on a horse because a horse is mobile. A horse just eats forage. A horse can go over difficult terrain. A horse doesn't have any problem going up hills and down hills or over craggy rocks or any of that stuff, right? But if you want to go someplace and you want to stay, you need a wagon. You need something to take your stuff. And if the West was settled the West couldn't be settled without a wagon. The Conestoga wagon is what made the West. There was a combination of things, but the Conestoga wagon, you know what that is, the one with a hoop canvas top, was rugged. It was big. You could put a lot of stuff in it. You had cover over the top. And when you got there, you could sell the wagon. If these vehicles exist, they can be rented. And the other argument that I like to make is this. The New World never would have been colonized, the New World never would have had the waves of immigration from the Old World. Here's the argument, right? We never would have had people coming to America from Ireland or from Germany or from Poland if they had to come up with the money to build the Queen Mary, right? The whole reason America got this wave of immigration is because people could find a way to scratch together enough money for a trip. A one-way trip in steerage costs, if you think about it, quite a bit less than the cost of building the actual ocean liner and using it one time. Do you see the genius of this, the power of this? The power of this is we go into the business of building these vehicles, and then anybody who needs to go anywhere in the solar system either buys or rents the vehicles to do whatever they want with. They don't have to cover this cost. We get it back at the end. Fantastic. You want to keep it because it's cheaper over the long run? Also fantastic. You want to set up a Mars colony? You maybe need 20 of these things in a constant rotation. We don't care. We'll build them for you. One of the things we're committed to is that the Mark I is the Mark I, and it's followed by the Mark II. And when you've gotten everything you can out of that design, when that design is finalized, then you do a new design. And when the new design is awesome and it's the state-of-the-art firecracker, it's the brand new 2012 Camaro, it's the brand new 7 gigahertz chip, what happens to the previous vehicles? They get cheaper. They get cheaper. So if you're on a budget and you want to colonize an asteroid, let's say, and you don't have a lot of money, you don't get to go in the brand new state-of-the-art vehicle. You get to go in the used one that's been out on the market for 10 or 12 years, but it still works. It'll still get you there. I'm telling you, I've given this a lot of thought. The vehicles then become honeybees, and they go around and they pollinate everything, and then the economy happens. First thing I would do, frankly, even before I put a moon base out, is I'd put a base on Ceres. The asteroid, or one asteroid that's much like it. Ceres is the largest of the asteroids out in the asteroid belt, and again, it takes no energy to get to Ceres because it's not got a significant gravity well. It's about the size of Texas, I guess, and so it's got a gravity field that's a couple hundredth of a G. But the thing we know about Ceres from our radar measurements is that Ceres is probably got more fresh water in it than the Great Lakes combined. Ceres may have more water in it than the Atlantic Ocean. We're not exactly sure, but we're quite sure that Ceres is full of liquid water. And the reason I put a base on Ceres first is if you had a source of water in essentially zero gravity, because Ceres is essentially in zero gravity, that means we don't have to crank the fuel up, the propellant up, because a nuclear rocket worked great on hydrogen. You could crack the water, split it into hydrogen for reaction mass, and then you keep the oxygen for your life support needs. If you have water, you got all the water you need for your drinking, for your hydroponics, all that stuff. So I'd go out there. First place I'd put a base down is I put a little base down on Ceres. That's why my the first movie is called Aurora, the Free Frontier. Second movie is called Aurora, Ice Station Ceres. And I'd put a base out there, and I could get reaction mass and liquid hydrogen and oxygen and all that stuff anywhere in the solar system for next to no energy cost because it's out there in zero G. Got it all sussed out. And we would, when I talked earlier about having buying a Spaceship Two, right? The thing that they're getting ready to launch for Virgin Galactic, $200,000 ride if you got the money. Of course, for $200,000 you get a guaranteed seat. For $995 a month, you just get to go in the pool that it's being drawn from, but it's probably better. It's certainly better odds than the lottery is. And what I would do is I would make sure that, by the way, I just have to answer this question. Mark still wants to know how can something the size of Texas have more water than the Atlantic? It's the size of Texas, but it's a sphere. It's a three-dimensional. It's cubic area, and the Atlantic is not nearly as deep as it is wide. The Atlantic's 2,000, 3,000 miles wide, and it's only a mile or two deep at its deepest. The thing about it is that hardware, you gotta buy the hardware, and you're gonna run people on it. And so I would keep the membership involved. I remember the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make is this: you got to keep, since you've got a website that's making this happen, you have to have constantly updated content. You got to update this thing daily or weekly. So, on Tuesday, you get a latest update from X-Corp. X-Corp has just used $14 million of the money from the Free Frontier to create this vehicle. Let's see how the test launch goes. Oh, it blew up. Oh, crap. Well, that's why we test vehicles. 2 days later, we'd give you another vehicle telling you what we learned about that explosion. Half the times they won't explode, and then more and more often it won't explode. But basically what I would do is if I was giving rides on Spaceship Two, I'd make sure I had a camera crew there, and I would simply make sure that every single time we flew anybody on one of these rides in the Viper jet, in the Lynx, Spaceship Two, into orbit, I'd have video cameras. We'd cut down a mix, and every couple days you would see people just like you going to and coming back from space, and they'd have that big old spaceship grin on their faces. I think you could sell some memberships that way. And the reason I miss Neil is because I wanted Neil Armstrong to get in front of this idea. I know how to do this stuff, but nobody knows who I am, and I'm not the guy. I'm the guy to come up with the idea. But the people who should be selling this, the people who should have been selling this, should have been guys like Neil Armstrong. What I wanted more than anything, what I really wanted more than anything, was I wanted a TV commercial that would have been Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins standing on top of a hill. Old men in their 80s. And I wanted them looking around, and I wanted something that basically said, we never thought that when we put footprints on the moon that would be the high point of human civilization. We thought that was just the beginning. That's why we went. We can go back again, We can go and not come home this time. We don't have to be dependent on Congress defunding Apollo 18, 19, and 20 or whatever. We can do it. We can do it, and we can protect it because it's ours, because we own it. The American people own it. And it's not coercive. It's not a big state program. It's voluntary. It's voluntary trade. It's the essence of free market capitalism. You're giving us $9.95 a month of your hard-earned money, and we're giving you something that we hope is worth your $9.95. National pride and the sense of achievement in a country that's better than it was before we started. That's kind of what I want to do. But I'll close this little screed on how I'm going to walk on the moon by telling you about the commercial. First thing I would do with the money, because you got to spend money to make money, and you've got to advertise if you want a membership base. I need 5 million Americans. If I had 10 million Americans, I've done the math on this. 10 million Americans is $100 million a month. That's $1.2 billion a year. You can't build it that fast. If I had that kind of money, we'd be in space. We'd never come back. We'd have 100. I've talked to the people that run X-Corp. I've talked to Burt Rutan about this. For $2 billion, we could keep 50 Americans on the moon forever. We'd never, ever, ever, ever have to bring them back. We should never bring them back. We should just keep going. So I would sell that way. But I'll tell you about the ad that I like, because this is my wheelhouse. This is the kind of thing I do for a living. Here's the ad for the Free Frontier, and it would run during the Super Bowl, by the way, and I'd be more than willing to pay the $1 million necessary to make sure everybody saw this. Here's the ad. It would be an HD image, and there'd be kind of somber music, and it would be the lunar surface, and there'd be a lander on the lunar surface, and it'd be a more advanced lander than the LEM. A little bit spindly looking, but it's certainly bigger and newer than the LEM. And then you'd see all these people in these living rooms dark at night, and you'd see people leaning forward, and you hear some transmissions, you'd see a little figure coming down the LEM. People are leaning forward. It's obviously a historic moment. And then below that it says 2021 or some date in the future. And then you'd see the guy come out, and he'd take a hammer, and he'd hammer a staff into the ground. And then he'd unfurl the flag, and it would be the Chinese flag. And then you'd see people in China with tears streaming down their face. It's 2021, and the Chinese flag is being unfurled on the moon. And you hear a Chinese astronaut say, one more step on the long march of socialism for the future. And you'd hold on that shot, and you'd see Americans looking really sad. And after you'd really gotten it, after it hit you right in the guts, you'd still be on the Chinese guy saluting the Chinese flag. And then you'd pan across the lunar surface, and there underneath the Earth would be a collection of domes and modules, and it would say the Earthlight Motel, and it would say vacancy, and in the foreground would be 4 American astronauts with a rover, and one American astronaut in a suit would turn to another guy and he'd say, don't just stand there, go get their bags for God's sake. And then the little rover would drive off to where the Chinese had just landed, and they'd take the Chinese instrument packages and they'd put it in the back of the rover, and they'd get the astronauts in, and the American guy would say, really glad you're here, glad you could make it. We got a terrific room for you. We got a sauna. We got some really lovely facilities. We got shuffleboard indoors. We think you're going to love it here. And you'd see the little rover going off to this little hotel with a little American flag, and it would say, open for business, Americans on the moon, $9.95 a month. That's what I would do. I'd go right at it. I'd go right at it. I'd go right directly at that fear that all of us have as American patriots, that sense that our best days are behind us, that it's going to be China. It's not going to be China. It's not going to be China. There's no way it's going to be China. They do not have what it takes to do this kind of thing. I'm telling you, if China is able to get to the moon, it will be because they utterly copied every single thing we did, but they will not ever, 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 ever put a flag further away from this planet than we do, ever. And I'm not going to let it happen. And I don't think you'd let it happen either. And I get the feeling that if I took this case to the American people, they wouldn't let it happen either. Because ultimately, when it's all said and done, I am selling a product here. And the product I am selling is not space exploration. It's not hardware. It's not anything. I'm selling pride. I'm selling pride is what I'm selling. I am selling pride. And we are a people that has been self-selected for risk and pride. Right? And I don't mean just metaphorically speaking. I had a chance to talk to somebody who's a really brilliant girl named Courtney Turner, and she taught me so many things. And Courtney actually said, no, it's Courtney knew, I don't know, I'm not bright enough to know, but Courtney basically said, no, there is a risk-taking gene, and they've isolated, and it's the N264 gene as expressed on the 7th allele or something like that, right? But as it turns out, there is a gene that is actually coded for risk, and the people who have this gene are more inclined to take risks. And I haven't done the test, and I bet if you did, I have no question about the outcome. We self-selected. We are a self-selected people. We're not just evolution at work. We are self-selected people. All of the people from all around the world who simply were not willing to sit there and take the king saying this, or pay your taxes, or do all these other things, all the people that just said, no, I'm going to give up everything I know. I'm going to abandon every single piece of stability that I know and familiarity, and I'm going to sell every little thing I have, even if it's just a straw bucket with a couple of eggs in it, and I'm going to get on a big shiny boat someplace, or maybe I'm going to get on a crappy boat or a canoe or whatever it takes, and I'm going to go to a land of opportunity. I have no idea what's there. I have no relatives there. I'm going to risk everything. I'm going to take my baby daughter and my grandmom, and we're going to get on a boat. We're going to go someplace where we don't know what is there. We know there's Indians and wolves, but we're going to go there. We're going to go. And we're going to take a chance. And that person is 1 out of 1,000, and the 999% of the other people out of 1,000 are still living in Mogadishu or in Warsaw or in Liverpool or whatever, because they didn't have the guts to take a chance. So we are a self-selected people. It's in our genes and it's in our DNA. And if you want to know what's wrong with America today, the simple problem with America, why our test scores are so low, why kids are slitting themselves and cutting themselves and hanging themselves and doing drugs all the time, it's because we don't take any risks anymore. We don't have any frontier. We're not doing anything that challenges us. Of course we're not happy. We're not happy because we're not using our abilities to the most of our capability. That's why we're not happy. I will give you a goal, because the goal will be never ended. The goal of this program is to push the American flag farther than it's ever been before, farther and faster. That's our goal. Our goal never ends. There's no end to the goal. We never reach our goal. That's the goal. But I am going to walk on the moon, and I am going to command the Enterprise on a mission to another planet, and I am going to either do that or die trying, so help me God. And I do not see a flaw in this idea. The only flaw in this idea is that I'm 53. If I was 33, I would be 100% sure of my ability to pull this off. Now I got to move fast. And so between now and the election, I'm going to do everything I can to get Barack Obama out of office, and starting on the first Wednesday in November, I'm going to start working on getting this movie done, and the movie is going to be the source of revenue that's going to make all this thing happen. And I'll say one last thing about this. I was talking to Bert Rutan and a guy named Brent. I won't give you his last name, but he's a brilliant engineer. His name is Brent Regan. And Brent Regan has a company. And just so you know what kind of guy Brent Regan is, I admire him enormously. I just met him, but he's exactly the kind of person I want to be like and to have as part of this thing. Brent Regan created something called Wave Rider. Do you know what Wave Rider is? Think about the genius. Think about the genius of what I'm about to describe to you. Wave Rider is imagine a torpedo, 5 or 6 feet long. It's a water vehicle. Okay, so imagine a torpedo, and then out of the sides of the torpedo, imagine 4 sets of flippers, 2 on a side, 4 deep, little flippers, and they move, right? So that as these flippers move back and forth, the vehicle moves through the water very slowly, 2 or 3 knots top end, 2 or 3, 4 miles an hour, something like that. Okay, now here's the genius. Imagine that you could do this so that the thing didn't require a battery and didn't require solar power, didn't require energy, but it just flipped and flipped and flipped using perpetual motion. Excuse me. The big brain on Brett Regan figured out that if you took this torpedo thing and you gave it slight negative buoyancy so it sank, and you suspended it from a float that had positive buoyancy. It was enough of a float to keep the whole thing afloat. And if you ran cables down from the float to the vehicle, every time the thing took a wave, every time a wave would lift the float and then compress the float, you could actually set up a mechanical device that would be something like a ratchet. It would turn a gear and so on, and it would just make the little flippers go flip. So as long as there's any kind of wave action, it moves. The more waves there are, the faster it moves. If there's no waves at all, it just sits there because it's not in any hurry. You see, that's the genius. So he put a GPS unit into this thing, and he put it in the water. And I said, hey, have you ever taken it out to the bay? Have you ever given it a try in the water? He said, I had 2 of them swim out to Hawaii from Oregon or wherever he launched them. I said, come on. He said, no, swam out to Hawaii. Really? Yeah, we track them every day. We pick up their GPS signal and we send them a target, and it uses GPS and it swims there. Are you serious? He's got 2 of them swimming to Australia now. It'll take a month or 2 to get there. He's got one, I think, swimming into the Indian Ocean from the west coast of America. There's no batteries. There's no electric motors. There's no nothing. It's a wave rider. And he just built it because he wanted to, because he thought it would be cool. And I say built it, I don't mean just came up with the idea. He manufactured the parts in his own workshop, in his own house up in Idaho, and it just swims around the ocean. What does it do? I don't care. It doesn't do anything. It just swims around the ocean. But it's an autonomous vehicle that is using the energy of the environment. It doesn't require any maintenance, doesn't require anything to charge or discharge. It's not got a lifetime swim until forever. Because it's in the water environment, he's done some brilliant engineering, because he's done things like make sure that you don't have a hole in the container, right? Because that'll eventually leak. So everything's done magnetically and things just clock into place and boom, off they go. He's a genius. He's a genius. He's very politically active in the Tea Party movement, and he's a great, great, solid American patriot. Solid American patriot. And I've become an enormous fan of his. And I was sitting there talking to him and Burt Rutan on the 5th of July up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in Burt's house, which he worked, well, like many Americans worked hard their entire lives in order to have a house like that to retire. But Burt Rutan not only worked his entire hard life and had a place to retire, but Burt Rutan also changed history and built a space program, put a man in space on his own. I have to tell you one quick little story. I might have mentioned this before. When I first met Bert, he had me come out and visit him out in Palm Springs. And as we were driving back to my airplane so I could fly home, Bert said, here's something for you to think about. How many space flights were there, Bill? How many manned space flights were there starting with the first flight of Gagarin in one calendar year? And I said, well, let me think. There was Gagarin, there was Leonov, one of those 2. So 2 Russians, and then there was a suborbital flight with Shepard, a suborbital flight with Grissom, and then the orbital flight with Glenn. So 5 manned space flights in the first calendar year, 1961, I guess. He says, that's exactly right. Well done. He said, how many manned space flights were there in 2007? Or 2008, I guess it was, when we did Spaceship One. I said, I don't know. He said, well, there were 5. We did 3 space flights in Spaceship One, and then there were like a shuttle launch and maybe a Soyuz or something like that. Maybe there were 2 shuttle launches that year. And he said, so there were 5 space flights in the first year of manned space flight. And then 30 years later or whatever, in 2007, there were also, if you had told me, here's how he told the story. He said, if you had told me in 1961 that in 2007 we were going to fly only as many times as we flew in the first year in space, and if you told me that I would be responsible for 3 of those 5 flights, I would have said you were insane. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Max says there's 7. He might know better than I. I don't know if I got the dates right or whatever, but in any event, it's a pretty profound thing, right? I think it was 5. In any event, it's a pretty profound thing that Burt Rutan himself personally produced 3 of the 5 space flights in the year 2007. That is not the kind of record we should be proud of as a country. And so we're going to do something about it. But I was telling you about Brent, and here's the reason I was telling you about it. I'm sitting in Bert's house overlooking the lake at Coeur d'Alene. I'd spent the 4th of July in Coeur d'Alene, and I always enjoy going to visit America when I get a chance to leave Los Angeles. It's always nice to go back to the United States. And everybody turned out for the 4th of July parade. The people were either on the parade route or they were in the parade. The entire town was there. And everybody is happy there, and everybody's polite there, and everybody's nice there. And Lake Coeur d'Alene is spectacular. It's beautiful. And as we were talking about this Free Frontier thing, Brent said, you know, you could get the government of Idaho would be very interested in something like this, because I said, now if you had a facility that was designed, that was coordinating, not replacing the work, but coordinating the work of guys like SpaceX and X-Corp and Bigelow and all these guys, you could put the best brains in the world in this place, and they'd come and work here, and you could get them, and you could get them for cheap. I don't think it'd have to be cheap, but you'd have to hire the best minds in the country. And then I realized, I like to lean forward for the effect. I don't just want the best minds in America. I want the best minds in the world, and I want to turn those best minds in the world into Americans. So if some of the best engineers in the world live in India, I would fly their families out to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'd put them in a spectacular facility. I'd treat them like people. I'd show them one of the most beautiful environments known to man, the nicest people on the face of planet Earth. And I would say, we want you to come and work here, but we don't want you to come and work here, learn how to do this, and take it back to India. We want you to come and work here and become Americans like the rest of us did. We all became Americans somewhere or another back in our past. Either us personally or our fathers or grandfathers and mothers and grandmothers made a decision to come and live here. That's what we want. I want to take the best minds on the face of the earth. I want to take the best Russian scientists and the best Chinese scientists, best Japanese scientists. I want to bring them here to America, and I want to take the best minds from America, needless to say, and I want to make them all Americans. Albert Einstein was an American. He died an American. He was an Austrian and a German, but they screwed it up. He's ours. He's ours. All of the great minds of the physicists of the atomic program, most of those guys were born overseas. They became Americans. I want to steal them, and I want to keep them working here, right? I want to work them here. I want to make this brain trust be the center of the universe as far as technology and breakthroughs are concerned, because I want to pay people the same way that Steve Jobs paid people. I want to be able to pay good people to deliver on their dreams. That doesn't mean they get to just sit around and do nothing, but I want to have a chance where they can sit around and figure out what it is they need to do in order to make these dreams happen. And that's when Brent said, you know, state of Idaho would be very interested in something like that. Private capital here in Idaho would be very interested in something like that. You could get the land, you probably could get the buildings, you could get all kinds of tax breaks, you can do all these things. So then I looked out over Lake Coeur d'Alene, and I saw it with my own eyes. I looked across the lake and I saw kind of a modern, low, wide facility built right on the lake. And I looked across the lake and I saw that building there, and I said to myself, oh my God, it's Starfleet Academy. It's Starfleet Academy. It's what it is. It's Starfleet Academy. It is. It's Starfleet Academy. It's Starfleet Academy for $9.95 a month. I know I can get 10 million people behind this. I know I can. I know I can. I'll tell you something else too. I would not make this about, I wouldn't make it a conservative space program. I'd make an active effort to get guys like Tom Hanks and Jon Stewart behind this, because frankly, its very structure is conservative, but I don't want to limit it. I want people who are proud of America to be proud of America. It's not a political deal. There's nothing political about it. I just want to go, and I want to go to work there. I want to go to work someplace nice. I want to go to Starfleet Academy. I want to go to work at Starfleet Academy, and I want to be surrounded by the best minds in the world, and I want to have this thing set up so that any member of the Free Frontier at any time of any day can come to this facility and get the tour. We have people on staff to do nothing but show members around, and I mean show them everything, because it's yours. It's yours. There's nothing more disgusting to me about Hollywood than the way that people in Hollywood treat other people's money. So at the very least, if you can get to Idaho or wherever we decide to put this thing, you get the owner's tour, because you are the owner. And I mean the owner's tour. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with this idea. No, I don't see anything wrong with it. And I think it's just a question of, do I wake up in the morning and do it? So I've still got a couple of 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks of 8 weeks of hard work on this campaign stuff, more firewalls, and then I'm going to get the movie done, and the movie's going to be the launching pad, and the movie and the reality they're going to set up a feedback loop. We're going to use the movie to promote the idea. We're going to show dramatic stories of adventure and excitement, and then when the movie closes, we're going to basically close the movie by saying, if you'd like to see this happen in real life, you can go to freefrontier.org and become a subscriber, and we'll go. And if you want to go, your name goes in the hat. And if your name comes up, you can go to the moon or Venus for $9.95 a month. That's pretty much it. Look at that. We've used up almost all our time. We didn't get to any other questions. I thought this was going to be a short take, but you know what? It's actually good. That's good. I'm glad we just did nothing but talk about this, because the one thing I wanted to do, and I guess the one thing that you were expecting in Stratosphere Lounge tonight, was a tribute to Neil Armstrong. And I never met Neil Armstrong, and now I never will. But I'd be willing to bet my life on the fact that of all the things you could do to honor that man's memory, I don't think there'd be anything that would make Neil Armstrong happier than pushing the flag further than he did. I really think that's the ultimate thing you can do for that man, is to not have him die as the greatest American, as not have the Apollo program be the high point of American history, or human history for that matter. I don't think any of them, I know none of them want that. It's antithetical to their principles. So where does the money come from? Space exploration is not cheap. Making movies isn't cheap, but making movies is 2 orders of magnitude cheaper, 3, than what I'm talking about here. But the question becomes, where does the money come from? It has to come from the American people. And it can't come from the American people through Congress, because Congress took the Apollo program and left a stack of 3 or 4 Saturn V sitting on the pads. We're just not going. What do you mean we're not going? We got them. We built them. They're ready. The crews are ready. Yeah, we're done. We've done it. Pfft, done. Okay. And the space shuttle, which originally started out as a vehicle on top of another vehicle, a means of getting to orbit that really would just cost not much more than the fuel, was designed to take off on the back of another larger jet like the 747 that transports it, but more sophisticated. Take off horizontally from any major airport in the country, which means you can launch it from Dallas, you could launch it from Vegas, you could launch it from Los Angeles, Miami, whatever. You could land it there too. Just refuel it and send it up again. Why did we not get that vehicle? Because Congress decided that it was too expensive on the startup, so they said no. So NASA, doing a little song and dance, tap dance to keep something afloat so we had some chance of staying in space, starts doing all of these engineering workarounds like the external tank and the solid rocket boosters. And it's not lost on me that the actual orbiter never killed anybody. The Challenger was destroyed by a failure in the solid rocket boosters. The Columbia was destroyed by ice and foam coming off of the external tank. Neither of those 2 accidents would have happened with the space shuttle designed the way it was supposed to be designed, but Congress decided we're gonna just cut the budget, cut. Nobody's cutting our budgets. We're the people that determine whether these budgets are cut or not. We're going to spend every single dime that we take in. Every dime that comes in is going to get spent on one thing. It's either going to get spent on the hardware. Most of it's going to go to hardware. The rest of it's going to go to keeping the best minds in this country working and growing and coming up with new technologies. And I guarantee you that we wouldn't even begin to understand how much money this thing will eventually make, because eventually this thing is going to generate patents and it's going to generate revenue. And that revenue goes right back into the foundation. I'm all about profit, but I think in order to make this really happen, you have to make this a non-profit, only because of the tax advantages. Right? This is $9.95 a month off your taxes. You get large donors involved. You get corporations involved. I want that first vehicle, by the way. I want the first vehicle that goes to another planet. I want that thing so covered with corporate stickers that NASCAR would blush. I want them to go, my God, that's laying it on a little thick, don't you think? I want Apple stickers and Microsoft stickers, and I want Tide and Budweiser. I want all of it. I want them to pay money so that their brand is associated with this form of human progress, because that's extra money for all of us. And I think this organization could then own a number of patents that would be able to pay enormous amounts of revenue. Where does the revenue go? It goes back into the foundation. And by the way, just so you don't think I've got this gigantic socialist thing on the hook here, let's just not forget, first of all, this is a free trade transaction. Nobody's being taxed. No one's being coerced in anything. Are you getting $9.95 of a month worth of pride from your money? If you're not, you probably should cut your membership. And if you are, then we've got a great relationship going. So there's that. And the second thing is the foundation may be a nonprofit, but what it's ultimately doing is spending money on private companies. SpaceX, X-Core, Scaled Composites, Bigelow, Armadillo, Blue Horizons, all these guys. Now, I originally thought that it would function something more like the National Academy of the Sciences, or even like the National Broadcasting Company, where it'd be just kind of a pool of money that was just sort of dispersed. But I quickly realized, now all of the egos involved in this means that everybody'd be going off in thousands of different directions. I've just got flight hardware, and I've got a vision, and I've got a goal, and I just need to buy stuff from them, because that's why we need money. Because I want to be able to say to Bigelow, well, I want to do this, and I want Bigelow, who makes the inflatable things, to say, well, that's not part of my business plan. And then I would say, well, is part of your business plan selling stuff to people for money? Because I'll buy them from you from a price that will make it worth your while. And at that point, we're in business. You know why? Because then we're dealing with capitalism. Then I'll get the stuff I want on time, and I'll get good stuff. And if I don't like that stuff, I'll go buy from somebody else, and somebody else will start a business to compete with this guy, because there will be money on the table. You can't argue with money on the table. Money on the table talks, and everything else walks. And in order to get the money on the table, we need money, and that has to come from somewhere, and I can't afford to put $700 million into this, and neither can you, but we can together. And somebody just wrote, oh, Max, yeah, the Stratosphere Lounge could actually be from above the stratosphere. Maybe we'll do the show from orbit. And maybe we'll do the show from orbit in 10 years. Maybe we'll do the show from orbit in 5 years. What about that thought? Because we will do the show from space. I think my chance of going into outer space now is in the high 90s. I think I've got an excellent chance to do it with the links at X-Core, and I think I've got a very good chance to do it with just for the promotional value from. I don't have the money right now. Probably will. Buying a flight from Virgin Galactic. We don't need a big old sack of money. We need lots and lots and lots and lots of very little sacks of money. That's what we need. And I think we can do it too. So in the comment section, if you happen to be registered as we close the show for the night, let me know what you think. If you see any problem with it, really all I want to know is, would you sign up? I would. I think everybody who hears this pitch would sign up. I don't see how you don't sign up for this, honest to God. I don't see how you're an American patriot and can't part with this money. And, the final thought I'll leave you with here is, in my story, which I first wrote in 2005 in Aurora, there are several different leading characters, but one of them is the guy who runs the program on the ground. And in the story, he was a guy who was not an engineer. He was a historian. And through force of will, because he's a very cantankerous, kind of an energetic sort of a guy, tough guy, his name is Sam Grafe, and in the story, through force of will, he's able to pull all this stuff together and make this happen because he has this vision. And his vision is not to create a space program. His vision, as I mentioned in an earlier episode, is to take Western civilization and put it in a bottle and throw it into the ocean, because when all this stuff burns down, we got to have American civilization. When I say burns down, when I mean financially collapses or whatever, we got to put America in a bottle and stick it out someplace where America can be in America, and that's space. So I had this character in my head for 7 years, something like that, and I kept thinking, someday somebody like that's going to come along. And then it's only in the last 6 months or so that I realized that person's got to be me. Not because I'm the best person for the job, it's just because somebody's got to do it. And when you think about this, it just leaves you you kind of have to sit in awe of it, because I know when I first came to Hollywood, my expectation was that you would, if you worked hard and you did a good job, you would eventually be brought up through the ranks, and finally would come the time where you'd get the big call from the big guys, and they'd take you to a room and they'd show you the curtain behind which the machinery sits, and then they'd pull the curtain aside and they'd show you the guys operating the machinery, and they'd show you how to run the machinery. And what I learned from my time in Hollywood is, you open the curtain and there is nobody running the machinery. Ain't nobody knows nothing. There's nobody running the machinery in Washington either. That's why it is such a shocking, depressing, and exciting idea to realize that the person who's going to do this has to be you. And I don't mean just me. I mean you. It has to be you. If you see something that needs to get done out there, you have to do it. And when the enormity of this, I'm talking about, I almost said changing history. I'm talking about something much bigger than that. I'm talking about trying to save civilization. I'm trying to save civilization. And anybody with any sense of human perspective who's not a utterly possessed, narcissistic, pathological sicko like the current president of the United States, for example, when you are confronted with the enormity of what you're talking about, I don't think there's a sane person out there who doesn't go, it can't be me. I'm just a guy, you know? And then you realize, the big breakthrough realization for me was, you realize that the founding fathers of this country, who you assumed, and who were, in fact, the great minds of the country, but these guys must have gotten together somewhere back there, and they must have said, surely there are dukes and earls and governors and ambassadors that can be doing this. I'm a silversmith, and you're a brewer, for God's sake. You're a small-town lawyer, and you're a planter, and you're some whack-job inventor who's got teenage girls on your arms, and it's a collection of misfits and miscreants and losers and you know, they must have at some level sat and looked at each, because we revere them because of what they accomplished, right? But if you're on the prior end of this achievement and there is no accomplishment, there's just a problem, must they have not looked at each other and just said, this is it, really? Us? Yeah, us. Who else? So anyway, I know this is an odd thing to say to the internet, with 150 people watching currently and maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people watching on YouTube, but try and keep it under your hat a little bit. This is not an official announcement. This is a running something up the flagpole and seeing if anybody salutes. And who was it? Jay Dietz just sent me one of the greatest compliments I've ever seen in the comment section here. He says, "You know, I have no idea how much you are sounding like Howard Rourke right now, Bill Whittle." Yeah, well, there are worse people to sound like than Howard Rourke, the main character in Atlas Shrugged. You know, the idea that we have an obligation to ourselves and an obligation to our species and an obligation to our gifts and an obligation to our everything. Certainly we have an obligation to the people who got us where we are today. We have an obligation to the people whose names we know, and we lost one of the great names of all time. So we have an obligation to Neil Armstrong to do this. And we have an obligation to all the guys who flew those missions, who risked their lives. We have an obligation to all the 100,000 people who worked not only in mission control and got a chance to light cigars, but all the people who manufactured the screws that went into the thrusters that went onto the back end of a piece of hardware someplace. We got an obligation to all those people. And of all the people that we have an obligation to, I think ultimately we have an obligation to the men and women in the military who never got a chance to grow up, who decided that this country was worth fighting for and went overseas at the age of 18 or 19 throughout our entire history for 250 years now. They went away and they never came back. And they never came back so that we could do these things. You know, we have an obligation to those people more than anybody, I think. Those are the people we really owe this to. And frankly, when you really get down to it, if I really think this all the way through, it's evil and disgusting not to do this. Not to do it. It's evil not to do it. People didn't die for nothing. People didn't die in this country so we could sit around and play with our Xboxes. You didn't have guys standing on Missionary Ridge or going up Mount Suribachi or getting blown to atoms on Normandy or Chosin Reservoir or in Khe Sanh. These guys didn't get shot and killed so that we could download internet porn and listen to our iPods. It's got to be about something bigger than that. And this country has got to the disease that is affecting this country is not anything wrong with our material. It's the makeup. There's nothing wrong with the material of the American people. There's nothing wrong with the flesh. It's the fact that we are built for better things than this. And we'd better do some better things than this, and we better do it right quick, because if we don't, we're going to lose what we're made out of, and then we'll deserve what's coming to us. So that's the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 13, the Giant Space Adventure edition. And I'm glad we started by talking about the the snazzy clothes, because frankly, that's a uniform I want to wear. I want to wear that uniform of achievement and optimism and risk and daring and guts and brains. And if we all have to dress that way in order to get ourselves back to where we need to be, then that's where we need to be. And if it takes the departure of guys like Neil Armstrong to make the point for us, then that's the last gift that we get from Neil Armstrong. And I'll close with this. Of all the appalling things I've heard and read about the amount of failure that we've lived with for the last 30 years, nothing hits me harder than this. So pay attention. Are you ready? No one who was born after 1935 has walked on the moon. No one born after 1935 has walked on the moon. Walking on the moon is an old man's game. It's a game for our grandfathers. It's an adventure for old men who lived a long time ago. If this doesn't scare the bejesus out of every single American, then I don't know what will. It's terrifying to me that no one has walked on the moon that was born after 1935. I was born in 1959. I should be the oldest moonwalker now, not the youngest moonwalker. Well, we got a lot of work to do. So I have, at the moment, I have 16,380 Facebook followers, and I bet I can get every single one of them to put $10 a month into this program, and I bet I can get every one of them to get 10 people to get $10 a month. And we're talking about incentives, and I don't want to get into all the details, but one of the things that should increase your chances, somebody put in the comment section, I hadn't really thought about this before, but it's true. The earlier you get in, somehow we got to weight that so that you have a better chance, and certainly I think we ought to reserve flights or seats on flights for people that bring in the most members. So if you want a really good chance, if you want a 100% chance, and you bring in the most members since the last flight, you bring in 625 people, you're going to space, by God, or whatever the numbers might be, something more like 60 people, who knows. That is another thing we have to do. We have to incentivize success, we have to incentivize growth, and we have to incentivize customer service. Customer service. Did you get your $10 worth of pride this month? Because if you didn't, we're doing something wrong. We got to get it fixed. Anyway, it's coming up on 8 o'clock, and it's time for me to go home. We've been broadcasting for 1 hour, 39 minutes, and 8 seconds. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you fine people who I knew would get this. And I'm glad I put that marker out there. Now I have to move, because if I don't do it, somebody else will. That's good. A little light under people's butt is a good thing. Competition and fear of missing the train is what makes us run. Neil, thanks for everything. I don't know what to say. Everything I did, from Stratosphere Lounge to eject to firewall and afterburn, all the words, just because I wanted to be like you. And I'm going to miss you. And I hope that you get a chance to, on some level, see what we're going to do, because we're going to set up, Armstrong base here. The Challenger has landed. That's what we're going to do. And it shouldn't be just about you either, buddy. We're going to have new names that we're going to have to write in the big book, and we better get off our butt and do it. And somebody wants to know, can we pay $80 a month? Yes, you can pay $80 a month. If you pay $80 a month and buy 8 memberships, you have 8 times the chance that you would have had otherwise to go fly into outer frickin' space. Okay, that's it. Thanks to all the Facebook fans. As usual, I'm going to take my brand new car and start moving into my brand new apartment, none of which I could do without the support of you fine people who are members of Declaration Entertainment or members of PJTV. And if you don't have the money right now, believe me, I understand it. Don't take that as a slant. Just being a Facebook friend is enormously important to me. And if you have some other people who you think you might like this kind of stuff, please go and let them know and recommend them, and they can come and be friends, and they can get the videos and hear about the great stuff. So we're going to go, man. We're going. I'm going to land on the moon. I'm going to walk on the moon. And if I don't, I'll be ashamed of myself. Okay, that's it, everybody. We'll see you. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next week. And this is the Stratosphere Lounge, episode 13. I'm Bill Woodall. See you next week. Bye-bye.